How you doing, everybody? Welcome back to Before I Forget. This is my video channel inspired by my Instagram channel, 1985 Road Dog. If you haven't checked it out, the Instagram, check it out. You'll find a lot of photos of my time in music as a fan and as somebody that worked in the business. I've gotten some questions from people that wanted me to talk about my earliest concerts. And I think I've done this before, but I'm going to update it. My first concerts, I was born in New York. I lived in New York till I was about 12, 12 going on 13. Then my parents divorced. I moved to Georgia for 5 years near a town called Columbus. That's where I saw my earliest concerts. My first concert was 1974, Lynyrd Skynyrd, Second Helping Tour. I was 13. Went with a friend of my uncle and his girlfriend, which was crazy in itself because all they did was make out and drink wine out of a wine pouch the entire time. Saw that show. I believe the opening band were, I want to say it was the Outlaws. I'm pretty sure it was the Outlaws. I saw Edgar Winter, 1975. I think it was my second concert. Edgar Winter Group had the big hits with Free Ride and Frankenstein, and his band still had Rick Derringer was playing guitar, and Dan Hartman was the bass player. Dan Hartman went on to, he had a couple disco hits in the late 70s. Instant Replay was a big hit. And then in the 80s, he had I Can Dream About You, Dan Hartman. Good songwriter, man. He wrote Free Ride for Edgar Winter. Saw that show. I saw Joe Cocker, 1975. His band was the band Stuff, like a soul funk kind of R&B band. I saw that show. Willie Nelson, 75. Kiss in 75. I saw so many shows at that little Columbus auditorium. There's about 5,000 capacity. There were like stands, like, seats up in the top, and then the floor was just an open floor, which they called festival seating. You just stood up. So if you got there early and were the first one in line at the door, when they opened up the auditorium, you could run right to the front and stand right in front of the show, the band, which I did for a lot of shows. I mean, I saw a ton of shows in that place. Blue Oyster Cult, Rush, Piper, Atlanta Rhythm Section, Foreigner, Cheap Trick. I saw Rick James. I had moved back to New York, but in 1980, I went back down there to visit, and I saw Rick James, and the opening act was Prince. I think Prince had the big hit at the time, I Want to Be Your Lover. And Rick James was on the Fire It Up tour. His song at the time was called Love Gun, different from the Kiss song. But I went to see Parliament Funkadelic in that same arena when I was like 15, 16, that same auditorium. I mean, and in those days, there were black shows and white shows. There were white concerts and black concerts, and they really didn't mix. I went to see Parliament Funkadelic, and the opening act was Bootsy Collins, who was the bass player in Parliament, but Bootsy had his own album out at the time, Stretching Out in a Rubber Band. And I was the only white guy in the whole place. Same with Rick James and Prince. I went with a guy that I knew down there, an African-American guy, and we went to the show, and I was the only white guy. I remember we were right in the front, and Rick James came out on stage at the beginning of the show and was walking back and forth and looking at the crowd, and he saw me in the front, a white guy, and he just pointed me and like, a white guy. It was funny. But I love all kinds of music. I have no boundaries when it comes to music. I like all kinds of stuff. So I went to so many shows there. Actually, the first time I ever went backstage to a show was in that auditorium, that same trip when I saw Rick James and Prince. Right before I went back to New York, the night before, I think, was 2 nights before, was a 4-band bill in that auditorium. Humble Pie, Mother's Finest, Frank Marino and Mahogany Rush, and Angel. Angel was the first band, and they had dropped the whole white shtick, and they were wearing regular street clothes. This is right before they broke up. This is 1980, spring 1980. So I was Angel, man. And we had actually gone over to there was a Holiday Inn that all the bands always stayed at. So we knew that. So we went to the Holiday Inn and we're hanging around, and we met the guys in Angel, and they gave me a backstage pass. That was my first show that I ever went backstage to. It was Angel. And they were the first band on that 4-band bill, and they did maybe 5 songs, 6 songs, and that was it. And I hung out with Angel the next day a little bit too at the hotel before they split. That was the first backstage show. What's funny is years later in the I don't know, 1990, I was working at a club in Manhattan, and the guy that installed the sound system in the club, or worked for the company that installed the sound system in the club, was one of the actual architectural designers, was Felix Robinson, the bass player from Angel. And I saw him, and he's like, my name's Felix. And I looked at him, I go, Felix Robinson? And he's like, yeah. And we just talked, and I told him the story of meeting them in Columbus, Georgia in 1980, and we were cracking up. It's a small world, man. But, once I got back to New York, I saw a million shows. I mean, you went to a concert. In New York, in big cities like that, there's amazing concerts every 5 times a week, So there was so much to see and so many concerts you could attend. I was constantly going to shows, and saw everybody, really. I mean, from the late 70s all the way through, to the late 90s. I mean, I saw a million concerts. I had, gotten a lot of record company connections, and, I worked for a record company, and all the people I had met over the years, I got a lot of free concert tickets. So I just was constantly going to concerts because I got free tickets all the time. Which is, once you start getting free tickets to everything, you don't want to pay for anything. So, I mean, you kind of get spoiled, you get used to it. But I saw, everything there is to see, pretty much all the way through the 70s. Of course, there's bands I never saw. I mean, I never saw Led Zeppelin. I just was never in the right place at the right time to see Zeppelin. It's kind of toward the end of it was the end of their, Zeppelin disbanded in 80. I just never saw Zeppelin. There's stuff I never saw, I'm sure. There's always something you never saw. Yeah, the only band that I still go to see regularly is the Stones. I love the Stones, and I'll go see the Stones at least once or twice a tour. But there's not really too much out there that I'm enthused about. I don't need to go see, M3 or any of these things, because I kind of lived it back in the days when it was happening. I don't need to relive it now. I got my fill of it, and, it's just, it was a time and a place, and it's not that time and a place for me anymore. So, that's pretty much the deal. I wish there was things I was more enthused about, and occasionally there will be, but the demand is too big. I'd really like to see The Cure this time around. The ticket demand is so insane. You never see The Cure. For me, anyway, I'm not going to spend $1,000 to go see a show. But anyway, I'm blabbing too long. That's my take on my earliest concerts in the early days. For me, thanks for tuning in. Check out my Instagram, 1985 Road Dog. I appreciate you watching and listening to me talk. I'll speak to you soon. Hope all is well. Ciao.